Philippe and Stacy, we're so happy to have you with us. Let's get started on the presentation.
Well, I will say, at least thank you and the entire McGraw-Hill community for allowing us to participate and work with you on this webinar. Of course, Stacy, for joining me. I'm actually down in Florida. I'm down here filming a new television series called Awesome Planet that we will announce, which actually hasn't been announced. So we're going to announce it here shortly in a few weeks, and it's going to premiere on Fox. It'll be syndicated on the local Fox stations across the country, and it'll launch in September. It's all about earth sciences, and we're going to be tying a lot of what we do here on the series into the education products that Earth Echo offers coming next year or the end of this year and next year. So a lot of exciting things coming, but I was actually diving out on a coral reef at the Florida Department of Environmental Protection this morning, and raced back here to the hotel in order to be able to join this webinar. So I'm really, really excited about this. You know, my grandfather always told me that teaching profession, the most valuable profession, and it's very true. And we're just thrilled to have teachers join us today on this webinar because you are doing such incredible work. We founded Earth Echo, as you heard, in 2004, about 10 years ago. It's hard to believe. In order to help you, to really give as many of the tools to you as we could to make science come alive in the classroom, to help young people follow the adventure of learning and the adventure of exploration and discovery. So, you know, I've had the opportunity to travel around the world, just like my father, Philippe Cousteau Sr., my grandfather, Jacques Cousteau, before me, and I've had an opportunity to witness some really incredible and awe-inspiring places and cultures and people. But unfortunately, I've also seen the clear and compelling evidence that, you know, we as humans are having a very serious and oftentimes negative impact on what we like to call our water planet. You know, we've all read about it in the papers. We've all seen about it in the news. The bad news keeps coming and coming. But you know, despite the fact that it is at times devastating, from famine to climate change, you know, a lot of these issues are complex. They're far-reaching. They're global in nature, and they integrate issues not just around environmental health and sustainability, but around human health, around human justice, social justice, development, the economy, etc. But despite all of that, despite all that bad news, I truly believe that we as a species, we as a people, as a culture, have the potential to find the innovative solutions that we need to turn it around. And I have to say, you know, I get to do a lot of exciting things. I get to travel, maybe to Series International, and I do lots of different work on top of what I do at Earth Echo. And the most exciting work that I do, however, isn't traveling to the Arctic, to the North Pole. It isn't in the jungles of the Amazon. It's working with young people. It's working with educators like you, and it's going to classes. And I mean that because, you know, when I'm bombarded by bad news, it gets pretty depressing. And for me, it's exciting when I have the opportunity to see how fired up and how passionate young people are, how this millennial generation and the generations that are one beneath the millennials, I don't even know what they're called yet. I don't know if they've been named something yet. But that audience, I'm sorry?
I don't think they have a name yet. I'm sorry.
Yes, I agree. I don't think they have a name yet. So the millennials and under are really exciting, and they empower me and give me hope, frankly, because, you know, as I said, I look at the problems we face. It's depressing and devastating, but then I look in the eyes of the young people, and then I see that the educators like you that are working so hard to empower them, and that's inspiring. And that kind of gives me the fuel then to keep doing the work that I do. Because I really believe that youth are the ones that change the world in every major movement, be it civil rights, women's rights, all these movements over the last 100 years, animal rights. It's really been younger generations that have picked up that flag and gone forward to create positive change. And we founded Earth Echo because of that, because my grandfather always told me that the key to solving these problems is empowering young people. And he himself dedicated the last many years of his life to education. So today, specifically, we wanted to work with you and cover a topic around project-based learning and service learning, and adventure-based learning, if you might call it that, something that we do at Earth Echo, and cover some basic core principles which our work, specifically our Earth Echo expeditions, is focused on. So some of the learning objectives that we wanted to cover today include some of the best practices for project-based learning and service learning, which is the foundation of what Earth Echo Expeditions does and our call of action to students. We want to take a closer look at how to access and utilize our resources to begin project-based learning or service learning unit in your own course pacing. And of course, we want to begin to explore how Earth Echo's model is happening in classrooms across the country right now, and local responses to global issues that are generating the impacts, not just in the local community, but the reality that young people can have an impact around the world and around the country in taking action in their communities. And we believe that our work is supporting the most effective way to learn, that experiential learning that really makes what kids are learning in the classroom, what they get out of textbooks, et cetera, come alive. And in particular, this year we launched a program called Expedition, and it was the pilot in the beginning, the first stage of a 3-year journey, a 3-year mission to explore the state of the big things that are happening in our planet. Because, you know, the evidence is there. It's compelling. The science is compelling. Human beings are altering our planet, and we're doing it at an alarming rate. Whether your information comes from the National Climate Assessment or the United Nations World Ocean Assessment or the IPCC reports, it doesn't really matter. The consensus of the scientific community is predicting frequent and more powerful extreme weather events, from storms in the Midwest to U.S. to droughts in the Southwest, rising ocean temperatures, chemistry, ocean acidification. Some of you may have heard of that, unsustainable practices and that are affecting our agriculture or that are causing fisheries to decline, which of course provide the primary, if not only, source of protein to over 1 billion people in the world. Think about that. The fact that 1 billion people to clean water in the estimates our population will grow from 7 billion this year to about 9 to 10 billion by the middle of this century. Now, what does that mean? It means, amongst many things, that population of people today that go to sleep without enough fresh water will grow conceivably to 3 more billion people, because most of the people being born are being born in parts of the world that don't have high rates of education, that do have high rates of poverty. Most of them are along coastal areas in Southeast Asia and India and Africa, areas that are specifically susceptible to storms and droughts, rising sea levels. And already those kinds of challenges from a conservation perspective are causing conflict. You know, the genocide in Darfur was largely a conflict over water. As the northern part of the country became more and more of a desert, people drove into conflict with each other in the search for water. Part of the conflict in the Middle East between Israel and the Palestinian territories is also driven by water. Already China is facing serious protests and challenges about water and food and air quality. So, you know, we've all seen the headlines. We're dealing with very, very, very serious issues. And I would argue that the biggest issues we're facing are twofold. One is carbon, and the other is nitrogen. And Earth Echo Expeditions is setting out to explore those issues, particularly carbon and nitrogen, that are contributing to these big global questions and challenges. Both carbon contributing, for example, to climate change and ocean acidification, and then the disruption of our nitrogen cycle, which is affecting our agriculture and the health of our oceans and our waterways and dead zones, and all sorts of other knockoff effects that are causing serious impacts to our health and our economy. So in the next 3 years, those are the things that we're exploring. But they're big global problems. And that's what's kind of scary about them, really, is that they pose a lot of hard questions. Complex integration with policy and culture. You know, up to 36%. We all hear about the pollution that's coming out of China. Excuse me. We're hearing about, for example, I live in Los Angeles, And several days out of the year in the west coast of the United States, we suffer from extreme and high levels of pollution, air pollution, because of pollution that's coming over from China. But think about the fact that, as China increases its output of nitrogen oxides and CO2s and sulfur dioxides and others, that 36% of the pollution that comes from China is actually caused by manufactured goods that they export, largely to countries like the United States and no doubt to California. Products that are cheap, products that we like to be able to buy cheaply and then oftentimes throw away, everything from plastic tchotchkes and cheap clothes. And we may think that's a good thing from an economic perspective in the short term, but what kind of effects does that have on our environment and thus our economy and our health in the long term? So who's responsible for that? These are big questions. Is it the consumer? Is it the producer? What kind of commitments does China have to make sure that there's clean air in California? What kind of choices do people in California have to make to ensure that we're demanding of Southeast Asian manufacturers in China that they do the right thing by their people and by their environment in producing the products that we want to consume? So it's a very, very complex and global issue. And they're not simple questions. And that's where you come in. That's where service learning and project-based learning comes in, because solving these problems, answering these questions, is going to require young people to be prepared to solve complex problems that are connected globally and oftentimes created locally. And so this 3-year mission of Earth Echo Expedition is exploring these critical environmental issues in a way that allows us to position environmental education as a core science education component, not as a nice to have, not as a nice add-on, but to embed that. Because also as we look at how science education is increasingly being taught as a system, we believe the best way to teach chemistry and biology and physics, geology, is to explore where they came from, which is the environment. So environmental education, we believe, is increasingly a core element of science education, not just a nice to have, but a must have. And that science and engineering concepts, sorry?
I was just going to jump right in there and say, I think you hit on a couple of really big topics just now, and the really core part of what I wanted to point out is that the complexity of these issues require not just an ability to understand science, not just an ability to engineer solutions, but also an ability to communicate. They need to have an ability to integrate diplomacy and have those 21st century skills that we're hearing are so important in association with the Common Core standards and the next generation science standards. So that's something that we here at Earth Echo are really thrilled to see such a huge push to integrate civic agency and the ability to communicate and the ability to understand economics as part of science education. These things aren't happening in silos. We've had classes separated out into very specific content areas for such a long time that sometimes we forget that the world that these students are going out into have the it's a really great thing that we like to address and really want to emphasize. I also wanted to kind of jump in really quickly and talk a little bit about that 3-year mission that you were talking about, Philippe, and that we're looking at a number of different topics over the next 3 years, and we're going to a number of different locations. One of the things that we have piloted our first Earth Echo expedition is that one of the pieces of information that we've really gotten back from educators across the nation is, when are you going to do an expedition where we are? Students really love to be able to not only connect to places far away, to things that are new and exciting and somewhat foreign. They really love to be able to connect to something that's right in their backyard. So one of the key things that we're trying to do as we move through our Earth Echo expeditions is explore a number of different geographic locations that hopefully students across the globe will be able to connect to eventually. But in this 3-year expedition, we've traveled throughout the Chesapeake Bay watershed for our first expedition. we're going, as Philippe said earlier, we're going to be in South Florida for kind of a crossover expedition this fall. Then we're going to be in Puget Sound area, Washington coast, for our ocean acidification expedition. So right now, we're really focused on 3 major cycles. And for those of you that have perused the NGSS, you know that there are relationships and places where these cycles are going to need to be taught. And we really want to create a platform where we can use service learning or project-based learning, as we talk a little more, as an educational approach to teach the nitrogen cycle, the carbon cycle, and global water cycle in relation to dead zones, ocean acidification, and climate change respectively.
Well, it's great, Stacey, right? Because it's so exciting to be able to do all that stuff now. We can do it in a way that nobody ever imagined just a few years ago because of the ease of distributing, digital education, digital media, and these synchronized learning opportunities. I mean, we're able to all talk, be all over the country, if not the world, and be able to have direct conversations in real time with each other. So being able to use that technology and to achieve all those expeditions and transport people to these amazing places is really exciting.
Agreed. And I think, Philippe, just kind of to set us up, because we're talking a lot about project-based and service learning, I do want to point out that, this is not Earth Echo's first time on the scene for this type of educational approach. We've grounded our programs in service learning and project-based learning for a number of years, and I think that first began with you. And I think you felt like the way, I think I'm putting words into your mouth here, but I think one of the things that you found so intriguing about service learning and project-based learning was the connection of young people to real-world experience.
Well, it is, to tell people, I'm not a product of my birth certificate or necessarily, we're all a product of genetics, but in terms of what I do for a living, I'm not a product of just following family footsteps. I'm a product of good teaching. I had a wonderful grandfather and family, an amazing mother. My father died 6 months before I was born. I never knew him, but my mother was an amazing, and is an amazing teacher. And then I had wonderful teachers in school. I was fortunate enough to have many wonderful educators that really, they're the ones that inspired me through having experiences, through going out and on expedition, or even just going out in my backyard and exploring the woods when we lived up in Connecticut, and asking questions. That's what inspired me to do what I do today. So I'm a product of service learning in many respects and experiential learning. And so I recognized immediately, years ago when we started down this path, we just launched expeditions, but as Stacey said, it's service learning and that kind of education is something we've been involved in for a long time. So I'm really a product of that myself, and that's why we believe in it so strongly and are so focused on that as a tool for education.
And so just for the purposes of the webinar today, I do want to differentiate. We wanted to make sure that we were kind of speaking to those folks that not only know a little bit about PBL and SL, but those folks that are just really new and want to learn a little bit more about how we can integrate these educational approaches to a STEM or science classroom. So I do want to differentiate really quickly. I stole a couple of kind of working definitions from, I shouldn't say stole, I borrowed and gave appropriate credit to some folks in these definitions, but the Buck Institute for Education has some great resources, and I did want to utilize their project-based learning definition, and it is a teaching student scale, working for an extended period to investigate and respond to a complex question, problem, or challenge. So a big thing that I want to point out there is, again, we're talking about complex questions, complex problems. Also, I want to point out that there's, these are things, this is an approach that does require an extended period of time. We're not talking about the end of the year canned project. We're not talking about the end of the year river sweep that all the kids participate in, and they show up with their grabbers and their bags, and that's their project. We're talking about something that is embedded in the curriculum, something that happens over an extended period of time that's planned for, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a little while. And response to that complex question in a way that is very student-centered. Service learning, on the other hand, our partners at the National Youth Leadership Council define service learning as an approach to teaching and learning in which students use academic knowledge and skills to address a genuine community need. So you can kind of see the parallel there. A complex question, a genuine community need. Really, the major factor for us that differentiates these two approaches is the civic component that is often embedded and certainly required where service learning is concerned. Project-based learning can sometimes come a little bit more in the form of design, and service learning, there really has to be that holistic community approach. We end up with a lot of advocacy and policy projects that young people and classes work on as a result of the service learning curriculum. So I did want to point out those kind of two working definitions right now. Both of these approaches are student-centered. Both of them connect learning to the real world. And we know that that is a best practice of education, that for students to be able, for young people, and even adult learners, to be able to really have a transformative educational experience, they've got to be able to find a touch point in the world where their learning really applies to them. So just moving on from that, we just want to emphasize again, the adventure really begins with a complex question. We talk about these huge issues that are facing our planet, and defining questions is an essential practice of service learning and project-based learning. And oftentimes you'll even hear it referred to as defining or beginning with an essential question. So, and that's something that we do when we work in our professional development workshops and online professional development with educators. We help to work with educators on defining those questions that they can utilize in their classroom to teach the content that fits in their pacing and their scope and sequence. So the best service learning programs and project-based learning programs that you will work with begin and end with this critical decision of what is the question. From that point, there's aligning the scope of the problem with the appropriate curriculum in your class. So again, we're talking about embedding this in the content that you already need to teach as an educator, not embedding this or tacking this on as another program or utilizing it only for a particular added piece with your students. And there are really three aspects that you always have to consider in designing a question. The biggest of them is what is the current knowledge base of your young people? Do they have the appropriate knowledge to address a particular issue, and what knowledge do you need to help bring to the table so that they can begin to explore the question? Also, what problem-solving skills and self-directedness your learner has. So these are the pieces of the puzzle that we have to know kind of going into creating any good project-based learning or service learning unit, is what is the skills, knowledge, attitudes that your learners are coming to the table with in order to know where they begin. So with that said, what we want to do is start with our first poll of the webinar. So first poll of the webinar, we're going to today just answer. I'm going to ask the question. I'll read it out and give you the answers here. And you can respond in your screen to the right, your little question screen. So service learning and project-based learning differ from traditional didactic instruction by, is it one, two, all, it could be any combination of answers here with our multiple choice questions. So is it A, promoting independent student work, B, simplifying the problem rather than engaging students in complex issues, C, increasing the connection between content and real-world experience, or D, reinforcing the teacher-centered classroom. So if you guys could just respond in your question box with the answer. I think we're going to have Elise kind of monitor that. Also, I wanted to go ahead and just remind us we don't have to hold questions until the end. As you see that we have quite a few people tuning in today, and we would love to hear questions kind of as we move through the webinar. You certainly don't have to wait until the end to ask us a question. So I'm going to give it just a few seconds to let the responses come in.
Okay, they're coming in.
Fantastic. Elise, have we had any questions yet?
No questions so far.
All right. Well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to let the answers roll in just a little bit, and I'll go back to this slide. Would that be okay, Elise? And we'll go back and maybe talk about the answers in just a sec?
Sounds great.
Okay. So what we wanted to do next is look a little bit at project-based learning in STEM. So we did our pilot Earth Echo expedition into the dead zone, which, as I said before, was an exploration into the Chesapeake Bay watershed. We looked at a couple of different inputs of nutrients that go into the Chesapeake Bay that are parts of the issue that creates the dead zone that occurs in the Chesapeake Bay every year. We know that there are over 400 dead zones worldwide, so this is a problem that can kind of span a number of different communities. So as we worked with schools across the country to explore that particular expedition, we have found some projects that we've already gotten some feedback on projects that young people have engaged in across the country. So one thing I do want to emphasize again, and I think you'll hear me say this over and over, these projects are not going to be canned projects. Through project-based learning and service learning, we really focus and center on youth voice. So we need to make sure that the students are driving the learning and driving the solutions. So, we're not going to have the same project from school to school to school. It's going to look a little different depending upon how they approach the problem and what problem they approached and how they developed their solutions. So, for these particular examples, we've got one of the driving questions here was how can a school reduce the waste it generates? So these students engaged in our Rethinking Waste action guide, which is kind of a pacing guide that we'll talk a little bit more about a little later. But these students decided that one of the best things that they could do was more of a design and an engineering project, and they designed a system to begin in vermicomposting. And this involved not only the physical design of composting with worms, but also the the social and the economic moving around that needed to happen within a school to get the waste of food and different products to their system, and who's monitoring the system and who's taking care of it over the summer. I mean, there's a lot of planning involved that was incorporated into their plan and their design for vermicomposting. The next question is, do we know that the streams and rivers in our community are safe? So we've got a number of different schools and classrooms that have established student-driven water monitoring programs, working partners, some working independently, some working with kind of online virtual partners. Almost all of them present water monitoring data to a community group or community organization. So they, the communication piece is really huge with these particular projects in that they evaluate how these tests work, which tests they need to do. We've got two particular schools in the New Jersey area that did a webcast this week with our education coordinator, Allie Toomey. And those schools are actually trying to set up water monitoring above or upstream and downstream from a wastewater plant, a wastewater treatment plant. And they're right now designing kind of their strategy to work together. So what are the tests that they need to look at upstream versus downstream? How are they going to make comparisons? How are they going to communicate? Because these are two different schools. So there are all these wonderful problem-solving, critical thinking skills that are embedded that these students are able to work on right now. And then another one was, do these dead zones differ from place to place? And we've had a classroom that engaged in a research project. And that particular research-based project was comparing the dead zones in the Chesapeake Bay and Gulf of Mexico, and what are the different ecological impacts in each of those different places. So what are the economic impacts, what are the ecological impacts, what are the size, what are the factors that influence each of those. One is, both of them are very, very driven by agriculture, but the Chesapeake Bay dead zone has a much higher urbanization input where there's a lot of stormwater that's really contributing to the dead zones, and therefore there's a lot of toxic heavy metals and things like that that are a part of that dead zone as well. So these students engaged in doing that research from peer-reviewed primary sources and really, really getting into the meat of that issue. And this is a great example that, the students don't necessarily have to leave the classroom to engage in a project. They led the learning, they developed their methods, they developed their rubric for assessment, and this is really a great opportunity to kind of look at how our digital world really is a very vibrant and interactive world. And when you're talking about young people, they live. You have to meet them where they are, and they live in the digital world. So this self-directed learning skills that we need young people to develop, utilizing digital tools is a really phenomenal way to do that, to kind of meet them where they are. So some additional projects that I wanted to kind of point out really quickly is we had some students that looked at how can we help restore a declining brown trout population. They have designed and maintained aquaculture ponds for rearing brown trout. They're working with a community partner to adopt 60 acres of shrub bog and take care of that, which is a habitat which is, I think, provides some nursery habitat. So these young people are working on a very direct project with, I think, a university partner there. How can you reduce agricultural runoff that contributes to dead zones? In this particular question, we were a little surprised that these folks came up with the idea of establishing a community-supported organic garden on campus. So if we don't have to purchase materials, fruits and vegetables that have been produced on large agricultural farms, then that's a way to kind of reduce the runoff if they're decreasing demand. And then how can students reduce stormwater runoff in the community when impervious surface removal is a barrier? So we've got some students that are building simple gray water and rain catchment for their school buildings. So they did a stormwater audit, and they evaluated that they really wanted to remove some impervious surface. That was a little bit of a barrier for them. They couldn't do that, so they are now building catchment and gray water infrastructure such that they can use that water for outdoor irrigation rather than letting it run off.
So, all these examples are, I think, so powerful because they remind us that, as you pointed out, it's not about directing young people to go and do a beach cleanup or recycling. Service learning and projecting are about empowering young people to identify an issue and a big complex problem that they care about. I saw a project down here in Florida where young people were care about the health of the coral reefs, big dead zone, the Florida Keys, and so they started doing research on sharks because they recognized that sharks are vital to the health of a healthy ocean ecosystem, and that all the hysteria and fear about sharks out there, even though more people die from coconuts falling on their heads every year than shark attacks, is largely a consequence of the media. It being news because it's so rare, and people's lack of understanding and lack of appreciation for sharks. And so young people, they care about the coral reefs, they care about the ocean environment, and then they're able to say, hey, you know what? We're passionate about sharks, though, and they find the linkage and big complex issues with sharks down here in South Florida. And so they're out doing research in the reefs with sharks and contributing to science that is actually being done at a university and post-grad and professional level. So there's all sorts of different opportunities for young people and teachers and schools to come up with really innovative solutions to these types of complex problems that align with what they're really passionate about and interested in already. As you mentioned, agricultural organic gardens. I've seen kids, sell the food to raise money for their schools, and there's just a lot out there. It's a really rich landscape to be able to explore when it comes to complex problems and innovative solutions. And young people come up with all sorts of stuff that I just never would have put two and two together, and they do. And it's
never think of those things. Elise, I wanted to check back in with you really quickly. Should we go back, or did we get much in response to the polling question?
We did. We had the majority of answers were either C or A and C.
A and C. Well, I'm going to go back to that one really quickly because A and C, I happen to know A and C were the answer, but service learning and project-based learning differ from traditional didactic instruction by promoting independent student work and increasing the connection between content and real-world experience. So bravo to our audience. we definitely want to increase both of those things. We are running a little bit behind, so I'm going to kind of move through some of these slides a little bit more quickly. But I wanted to point out specifically that I was at a really great conference not long ago that was specifically on the next generation science standards and STEM. And we did a poll. There were at least 200 or 300 formal and informal educators in the room. And we specifically kind of put up these 8 science and engineering practices in the next generation science standards and said, which ones of these do your students have, more of a problem doing? And which ones do you think we're doing well, and which ones do you think that we're, not really able to do in a traditional science education classroom? And it was really, really revealing. It was very revealing that a huge fraction of the folks in the room talk specifically about the science and engineering practices of 1, asking questions and defining problems, 7, engaging in argument from evidence, and 8, obtaining, evaluating, and communicating information. Most of the teachers that we worked with felt like students were really good at planning and carrying out investigations. They were really quite good at analyzing and interpreting data and using math and computational thinking. But asking questions, defining problems, engaging in argument from evidence, understanding how to find the evidence and then discuss that. Those were big 21st century skills that really needed to be addressed in the existing science education space. So we were thrilled when we were talking about NGSS because we got to see these science and engineering practices as a focal point, but we also had a conversation about how project-based and service learning both really give broad, in the front opportunities to address those particular science and engineering practices. Now we come to our next poll, and I'm going to do this one really quickly. What 21st century skills should be incorporated? What do you guys think into project-based or service learning? Is it A, collaboration, B, critical thinking, C, innovation, D, information literacy, or E, self-directed learning? So again, I'm going to let you guys kind of roll your answers in. Again, Elise, I'm going to check with you and see, are there questions that we should be addressing right now?
No questions, but we're getting some answers here, and the consensus seems to be that all of the above is the correct answer.
Yes, all of the above. A good project-based learning or service learning experience should include all of the above here. So collaboration is up at the top here, and I always want to really point that out. That we don't have jobs anymore that really operate in the single space. Collaboration is key, and it's a huge thing that we hear from industry leaders, the 21st century skills and people needing when they come out of school and into the workforce. So if we knew what it was we were doing, it would not be called research, would it? We put this in here because a big piece of what Earth Echo Expeditions was created for was to fill a need that we've seen identified in science education. And I think Philippe's multiple hats give him audience with a number of different folks. I work primarily with education providers and teachers, but Philippe gets to go out into the world and talk with a number of different folks, and we talked quite a bit about that as we were building Earth Echo Expeditions. Philippe, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean it's a big challenge, right? We live in a world with a rapidly changing world, a global world, and a lot of young people just aren't prepared to face it and deal with it. And so it's really all about helping provide the resources and tools, and that's what I think project learning, service learning does so well, is really help connect, help to think of the world as a system, and also make relevant the kinds of things that we're learning in the classroom. And fundamentally, our interest is really about how do we help people solve problems and solve these big problems, because I can tell you, we're not going to solve them if we're not all working on them together. And that's a really urgent challenge.
Well, and we think we have a pretty good answer here to get us started anyway. So I want to talk a little bit about specifically Earth Echo expeditions and how teachers can engage. So we talk about beginning the journey. We would like to see as an outcome with our Earth Echo expedition program that teachers and students have the tools they need to engage in their own environmental action. And so for us, an environmental action includes an iterative process that's around ecological or social inquiry. And as a result, both science and civic engagement are essential. So we can't really remove the civic piece from the scientific research and discovery. So for success, we need a number of things to be considered as we begin to build a project-based learning or a service learning unit. And first, we need to plan in advance. There needs to be appropriate pacing. We need to know where to embed it. You know, as a teacher, you need to know where to embed it in your program, in your curriculum. So we provide alignment grids for the Common Core state standards as well as NGSS. For all of the programs, as we complete each expedition, those grids are available for teachers to use so they can pinpoint exactly where they can use the materials. And these materials include lesson plans, classroom activities, videos with scientific experts, videos with Philippe and different community members exploring specific environmental issues or impacts. It includes a lot of video of young people who are already taking action. So a lot of the stories that we've already talked about, we have different videos or blogs of different things that young people have created for us or that we've gone out with our production crew and been there on action days or been there when they're taking environmental action in their community. And we can share that with students by recording it and creating high-quality digital content that relates to education standards. So that actually led right into number 3. So exploring virtually with rich media. So again, we want to delve into that digital world. If we can't bring the kids to Chesapeake Bay to dive with Philippe, then we want to take them as close to that as we can. So we take a camera down with him, and he can communicate and talk with them, sometimes live and then sometimes recorded. Really position students as designers and problem solvers. So young people, again, we go back to the self-directed learning. Young people must know that they are leading the learning. They need to understand, I'm going to talk a little bit about our 5-step process, and they need to understand how that process works and how they're integrated into it. They also need to be engaged in developing assessments and developing some progress monitoring around this type of educational approach. Also, it's not completely passive for teachers. Project-based and service learning is probably more active for teachers, even though in the classroom it looks, it's very student-centered. You need to provide, educators have to provide guidance around skill building, progress monitoring, assessment, collaboration. We need to meet students where they are and provide them with the 21st century skills that they need to do the front-end research and to gather the information that they need and to actually walk away with the learning with from the education standards that you put into the planning of the complex question. And then finally, allow adequate time and instruction for students to drive the learning. And again, timing is everything. It can't be crammed into the end of the school year. So I want to walk through kind of a 5-step process that all of our Earth Echo materials try to reflect. So we start with investigation, which is guiding the students through these 5 stages so they know we're going to learn about climate change. We're going to do it, or we're going to learn about the carbon cycle, and we're going to do it using the lens of ocean acidification. And we're going to do it such that you are creating an environmental action project at the back end of this so that we know that you can demonstrate the learning that you've achieved over the course of the next few weeks. So we provide the students with tools for investigation. We provide teachers with activities and lesson plans that they can use as kind of a platform, a jumping off point for learning, and a ton of rich media content. And we're constantly revising and revamping and creating new rich media, digital, interactive content. We're actually going through a big process right now to unveil some fantastic new content, hopefully, in the spring and fall of 2015. And really important to this, to empower the students with examples of student projects. A young person can't know that they can, change the way a community handles their used cooking grease and create a program where, cooking grease is being delivered to homes that need it for fuel oil. It's being converted to fuel oil and used to heat homes. Young people can create programs like that. And the only thing that a lot of them really even need to get off the ground to think that way is to see other young people doing the same thing, doing that type of thing. After investigation becomes preparation. And in preparation, we really want to connect these big global issues to the local community. So, you always hear think globally, act locally. But really, in this particular case, we really want to make sure that the students can connect something like ocean acidification to their daily lives. So if you live in the middle of Ohio, how does the ocean connect to you? And we want to make sure that we can help young people make those connections. So in that regard, they need to identify local stakeholders. They need impact. To do that through a variety of mechanisms, not just through media researching. We really advocate that young people do observation and experimentation through audits, and we provide a number of audit tools. We really encourage interviews and surveys to really get a handle on policy and community practices that revolve around that particular issue. And we have to understand both public and private policy related to whatever big global issue the young people are looking into. And then they move into action. So we've gone through investigation and preparation to big steps. A lot of times, the action begins with an audit. So what is our local impact? We learned about ocean acidification, or we learned about dead zones. What is our impact? So you could do a school stormwater audit. They could do a energy audit of their campus. So, and we provide tools for stormwater auditing, food audits, waste audits, energy audits, a number of different tools that young people can use to go through and really examine their own impact. And then they develop their action and design a project, usually with the help of an expert or a community group. Always collaborative work and resulting collaborative assessment. And then we go into reflection, and that reflection needs to be iterative at every stage of the process. So as they reflect on what they've done and what they've learned, it needs to be reflected in their plan of action moving forward. It's clearly continuous throughout. And there always needs to be a plan when they develop an environmental action in conjunction with a community partner or not, a plan for sustainability and or maintenance. And that kind of often results in a demonstration of learning event, whether it's creating some materials, some outreach materials, hosting an event, different things that we let young people really guide that process of how they want to demonstrate how learning has happened. Now, this is our final polling question today. So, Earth Echo expeditions into the dead zones provide. So we really wanted to kind of specifically talk about what materials we can provide for educators. And so we've got A, lesson plans and classroom activities, B, interactive online events to connect students with science experts, rich media, C, rich media content for students to explore, D, alignment grids for Common Core, state standards, and NGSS. Or E, student action guides that are issue-driven.
Okay, Stacey, we have a question, too, about resources. We'd like to know if these can be found on the Earth Echo website.
They absolutely can. So if we were saving some of the resources at the end, or some of the websites and things like that at the end, but I think I can share. Elise, can I share through chat, or is that where we can share with everyone? There we go. I am going.
You might not be able to share your screen.
Yeah, I can. So if you want to type this in, somebody, or I can just tell you guys out loud, just go to www.earthecho.org. You can access all of our resources. You can either follow the page. There's an expeditions tab, or you can go to educator resources. Now there is a kind of a login screen such that we want folks to set up an account so that we can make sure that you're provided with the latest information. But there's no charge for any of these resources. We've got some wonderful organizations that support our development of materials, and so these are provided at no charge to educators. We also do professional development, and you can reach out to myself or any of our education staff at education@earthecho.org. and we will be glad to talk a little bit about, how to access the resources and what additional things we can provide, support we can provide.
Well, and the idea is this is just the tip of the iceberg. Expedition into the Dead Zone was really the very beginning for us. We've learned a lot from that. We're going to be launching a lot more tools. We're doing expeditions, as we said, into Florida in the fall, in the Pacific Northwest in the spring. We're looking at tying in planets and resources. So lots of stuff to come, and this is just the beginning, and we really do take it seriously to hear back from the educators that we're working with about what works, what doesn't work, because this is an urgent challenge. So, Stacey, I don't know if you want to look at the results of the poll.
Yeah, let's see. At least what we got from the poll.
Yep, looks like all of the above.
All of the above.
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is all of the above. So we provide everything that you see here, and really hope to even provide more in the coming years. So as we continue to build our expeditions, we want to see more. We're probably going to close out a little bit with this particular quote and take a few questions. But Philippe, I was going to let you go ahead, and this one kind of falls to you as far as the quote. And
yeah, absolutely. This is a quote that I grew up with, a quote from my grandfather. For most of history, man has had to fight nature to survive. And in this century, he's beginning to realize that in order to survive, he must protect it. And that's really a fundamental shift in thinking for humanity that has happened in the last few decades. And it's one that, we're just beginning to understand the long-term repercussions of all of our decades of pollution and all of our actions. And unfortunately, the next generation doesn't have that luxury. They don't have the luxury of that kind of learning curve. And we need young people who are prepared to think critically and take action now. And for us, our goal in all of our work is to create environmental citizens, to use the project-based learning and service learning and adventure learning in the classroom to empower educators to create environmental citizens. And an environment is three: students or an individual who has the knowledge, they have environmental literacy, they understand how policy is created, they understand that environmental issues are multifaceted and multidisciplinary, they understand how local stakeholders are integrated. They also have the skills to navigate policy making, to engage in critical thinking, to make observations, and to communicate what they're learning and what they know through leadership to the local community and thought leaders, business leaders, etc. And then, of course, that environmental citizens have the attitude and inclination to take action, to move from thinking about I to thinking about we, and to develop community-centered motivation, to really think globally but act locally in their work and in their lives, not just through one particular project in school, but all the research and data that shows when kids engage in this kind of work, they become the kind of critically thinking, civically engaged citizens that we need in order to be and build a more successful society and sustainable planet.
Right. And we've got a couple of slides here that I'm going to skip over, but there are additional stories. We've got some wonderful stories from the Earth Conservation Corps, the students that are working on some projects there. We have a wonderful relationship with the Miami-Dade Public Schools, and we've got some great projects coming from work that we've done to support some of those projects with the Captain Planet Foundation. And as always, project-based learning, service learning as an educational approach is great with science projects. And we've had some specific instances of that I would love to talk a little bit more about. If anybody wants to get in touch with us, we can certainly talk more about those examples.
Yeah, we could go on and on, right, Stacey? I mean, we've had so many amazing stories of young people all across the country and around the world in my travels that I've seen that are doing innovative, remarkable things, changing the face of communities, raising money, passing laws. It's just fantastic.
They're changing the world. And they're changing the world.
They are. But in the interest of time, I know we want to be able to answer any questions that you all might have. So we should, yeah, we'll as Sid said, we'll jump forward here to some of the ways that you can reach out to us, and of course, if there are questions, we'd be delighted to answer them.
Elise, have we had any additional questions?
We've had one question, and it's about how many people were involved or on the team for this project, and what professions do they have?
For the so for our Earth Echo expeditions into the Dead Zone project, the number of people. So wow. We went to, yeah, a lot. We went to 5 different locations. There were upwards of 20 scientists that worked with us on everything from, you know, sustainable agriculture, to wastewater treatment, to ecosystem function, to stormwater management. So we had a number of scientists, you know, somewhere around 20 scientists that worked with us, probably another dozen nonprofit and advocacy group staff that worked with us, well over 50 to 60 young people, gosh, probably nearly 100 young people actually. Yeah,
probably closer to 100.
Yeah, that we worked with on that particular project. And our lovely production team at Symbio Studios, which was, that's another, you know, how many of us did we have? 8 of them that really helped us put that together.
It was a big group.
Big group. And we did go to several different locations. So we were in the mountains of West Virginia. We were in the mountains of Virginia. We were in the Chesapeake Bay proper. We were in Annapolis, D.C., Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Oh, I'm forgetting folks, and that is terrible. But we were. It was a large project with a large number of people covering a huge watershed. So the EPA was a huge partner, and NOAA was a huge partner. So those are great partners that I do want to point out.
Okay, that looks like all of the questions.
Well, we want to thank you guys. Elise, thanks to McGraw-Hill for working with us, McGraw-Hill Education for working with us on this. It was a great experience to work with you guys.
Well,
it was a lot of fun, and we were delighted to participate and really appreciate everybody joining us today.
Wonderful. Thank you, and thank you to all the attendees. A survey is going to pop up at the end of this webinar, and after you complete the survey, you'll get a follow-up email containing a recording of the session and evidence of your participation that you can use towards CEU credit. If you have any additional questions, feel free to get in touch with the Earth Echo team, or you can email webinars@mheducation.com. And don't forget to check out more information about the Next Gen standards at mheonline.com/NGSS. So wonderful. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.